Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping right in today.
Yeah, straight to it.
We've got a new executive order here. It's titled Initial Rescissions of Harmful Executive Orders and Actions.
That's the one.
And our goal is to basically pull out the key bits for you so you can get up to speed on what could be some pretty big shifts in government policy.
Exactly. Without having to wade through, all the dense legal text.
Right. It's about understanding the potential changes quickly.
And this order, it signals a change, no doubt. It revokes a whole slew of actions from the previous administration.
Okay, so let's unpack the why first. The order itself states its purpose pretty clearly.
It does. It talks about restoring common sense and unleashing American potential.
And it sets that up by, well, criticizing the policies it's replacing. It calls them unpopular, inflationary, illegal, and radical.
Yeah, strong language. It specifically calls out diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI plus border policies, and what it terms climate extremism.
So this framing is important context for everything else in the order.
Definitely. It presents these previous policies, particularly DEI, as creating what it calls a divisive and dangerous preferential hierarchy, undermining merit, basically.
And it claims the border policies were endangering Americans, straining resources.
Right, and that climate actions were fueling inflation and hurting businesses. Again, this is the justification provided in the order for the changes.
So the stated aim is this restoration of common sense, and it says this is just the first step.
Just at the beginning, yeah. Aiming to make the nation, quote, united, fair, safe, and prosperous again.
For those of you maybe thinking about your career or running a business, these kinds of shifts, well, they could definitely have an impact down the line.
Absolutely. Understanding this initial setup, this rationale, is pretty key to anticipating what might actually change on the ground.
Okay, left into the core of it then, Section 2, the revocations.
And, wow, it's a long list.
They weren't kidding about initial rescissions, were they? Over 80 actions listed.
Yeah, more than 80. It's a lot. Maybe we can group them a bit, make it easier to grasp.
Good idea. What themes jump out?
Well, first, given the intro language, there's a big cluster around racial equity and underserved communities.
Right, like EO 13985, advancing racial equity, and several others with similar goals.
Exactly. And connecting that back to the order's criticism of DEI, well, it's a pretty direct line.
So, a clear signal of a different approach to equity issues from the federal government.
Seems that way. Moving perhaps away from some of those proactive measures.
Okay.
A significant number relate to the COVID-19 response.
Ah, okay. Things like government coordination, equitable recovery, testing protocols.
All those, yes. Orders like 13987, 13995, 14,000. It suggests a shift in how future public health situations might be handled federally.
Makes sense. What's next?
Climate and environment. A really substantial rollback here.
Like EO 13990, the one about public health, environment, and science-based climate policy.
That's a big one, yes. And others on climate-related financial risk, clean energy infrastructure.
So EO 13990, that was linked to the Paris Agreement commitment, wasn't it?
It was. Revoking it suggests, well, a potential shift away from those kinds of international climate agreements and maybe easing some environmental regulations.
Okay, another major area.
Immigration. Definitely.
What kind of orders are we talking about there?
Things related to civil immigration enforcement priorities, looking at migration causes, family reunification, refugee resettlement, orders like 14010, 14011, 14012.
So potentially changing how border security and immigration are managed?
That seems to be the direction indicated, yeah.
And you mentioned DEI earlier, but there's more under a broader discrimination and inclusion umbrella.
Right. Beyond just the racial equity focus, there's an order, 13988, aimed at preventing discrimination based on gender identity or sexual orientation.
So rescinding that could have implications for LGBTQ plus protections at the federal level.
It could, yes. That's one to watch.
We're covering a lot of ground. What else is in this suite?
Well, there's quite a bit under government operations and ethics. Things like ethics commitments for appointees, advisory committees, that sort of thing. And even healthcare sees some changes. Orders related to strengthening the ACA and Medicaid or lowering drug costs.
Like EO 14009 and 14070.
Those are included, yes.
Yeah.
It really is quite a broad reset, over 80 distinct actions.
It's like, as you said, a fundamental reassessment across so many different areas, social issues, the economy, environment.
Exactly. It touches almost every aspect of federal policy. It really makes you think about how interconnected all these things are, you know?
Yeah.
Changing one area could ripple through others.
It really could. It feels like a massive undo on recent policy directions. Okay, so that's a what. What about the how? Section 3 talks implementation, right?
It does, and it starts with a very direct instruction, Section 3A.
Which is?
Agency heads are told to immediately stop implementing what the order calls unlawful and radical DEI ideology.
So a direct follow-through from that initial framing we discussed. Immediate action required.
Very immediate. But it doesn't stop there. Section 3B sets up a review.
A review, okay.
Yeah, a 45-day review led by the directors of the Domestic Policy Council and the National Economic Council.
And what are they reviewing?
They have to look at all the actions taken under those 80-plus revoked orders.
Okay. And the goal?
To recommend further rescissions, potentially, or propose new replacement actions. The stated goal is boosting American prosperity.
So 45 days isn't long. We could see even more changes coming pretty soon then.
That's the implication. This might just be the first wave. That tight deadline suggests they want to move fast.
And this review is just for domestic policy?
Well, there's a parallel track for national security,
Yeah.
Section 3C.
Ah, okay. Who's handling that?
The National Security Advisor, same 45-day time frame.
But reviewing what, specifically? Not just executive orders?
No, this one targets all national security memoranda NSMs issued between January 2021 and January 2025.
And the criteria for that review?
They're looking for potential harm to national security, domestic resilience, and what the order calls American values. Again, with recommendations for rescissions expected.
So that broadens the scope quite a bit, beyond just the EOs, looking at foreign policy, defense strategy guidance.
Exactly. It suggests a really comprehensive reevaluation across the board, domestic, international, security, all happening concurrently.
Okay. Now, these orders always have some standard legal language, don't they? Section 4, the general provisions.
They do. It clarifies the boundaries. For instance, it says the order doesn't override existing legal authorities of agencies.
Right, or mess with the Office of Management and Budget's role in, budgets and legislation.
Standard stuff. It also mentions that everything has to be implemented consistent with applicable law and, crucially, the availability of appropriations.
So practical limits. Money matters.
Always. But probably the key point in Section 4 for you listening is 4C.
What does that say?
It basically says this order doesn't create any new legal rights or benefits that someone could sue the government over.
Ah, okay. So it's primarily about directing the government itself, not creating new individual legal claims.
Precisely. It's standard but important context. It manages expectations about the direct legal impact on individuals.
Okay, so let's pull this together. We've got a major executive order.
A big one.
Revoking, over 80 previous actions across a whole range of areas: DEI, COVID, climate, immigration, and more.
Yeah, a huge rollback. With the stated reason being to restore common sense and boost the economy and citizen potential.
And importantly, it sets up these immediate actions for agencies, particularly around DEI.
Right, plus these two 45-day review periods. One for domestic policy follow-ups.
And one for national security memoranda, meaning we should probably expect more news on this front relatively soon.
Absolutely. Those deadlines suggest the next month and a half could see further developments. Anyone tracking policy needs to keep an eye on that.
So for you, our listener, hopefully this deep dive gives you a solid overview of what's happened and what might be coming.
Yeah, if you're trying to figure out the direction things are heading, whether it's for your job, your industry, or just understanding the broader landscape, this order is, it's a really key piece of the puzzle right now.
It really is.
And maybe something for you to think about.
Yeah.
Given just how broad these revocations are and the reasons stated in the order, what areas do you think will actually see the biggest changes on the ground in the next few months?
That's a great question. How might changes in, say, environmental rules affect economic policy? Or how might shifts in equity initiatives impact government operations?
Yeah, thinking about those connections, because these things aren't really isolated, are they?
Not at all. So consider that. This deep dive is really just the start. Watching what happens next, how these reviews play out, that'll be crucial.
Definitely. We'll be watching too.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.